If you guys enjoy this podcast, I'm going to do that thing that I thought I would never do and say, please, please, please like or subscribe to our show. When you do that, it tells everyone that we can keep making these episodes for you. It indicates that you're enjoying the show, that it's something that's worthwhile for us to do. We love talking to these authors. We love giving you access to these authors, and we love getting inside their minds and giving you a little sense of exactly how they approach their creative process. So, if you feel so moved, please, please like or subscribe to The Bookshelf with Jennifer Morrison. All right. Caroline, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. I'm really excited to chat with you about this novel and publishing and books in general. So, yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Well, first of all, can you explain for our listeners, because I feel like it's very rare to get to talk to an editor. So, can you explain your position and exactly what that means in terms of what you do on the day to day, but also what that means for an author who's working with you?
For sure. So I'm an executive editor at Flatiron Books, which is an imprint at Macmillan. Um, and I edit primarily fiction. I've been there for over 10 years now. Um, a big part of my job is sort of what you think of when you close your eyes and think of an editor. Like I'm reading submissions, deciding what I want us to acquire and publish. I'm editing manuscripts with my writers. I'm having conversations with them talking about structural edits and line edits and, the publication process and all of that. I would say that is maybe half of my job, like those very straightforward editorial tasks. And then half of my job is really project management. So I am kind of the author's liaison for every part of the publishing process. I am their voice in the room. I'm their, kind of their connection to everybody who's going to touch the book at the publishing house and then in the larger literary world. So, for instance, before they meet their publicity and marketer, I'm kind of setting up those relationships. I'm pitching the book to our sales force. I'm reaching out to independent booksellers, telling them about the book, sending early galleys, writing personal notes. Same thing with librarians, figuring out the best campaign strategy for Goodreads to get the book out there to early readers. So, I have sometimes like dozens of books and authors that I'm working with at any given time at various stages of the process because the life of a book is so long. Like it takes a year between when we're kind of finished with our edits and I've turned it over to production for copy editing and when the book actually arrives in bookstores. So during that year, we're building up buzz, we're preparing for publication in all the ways that we can. But before that even starts, like that kind of official beginning of the book's life towards publication, sometimes I'll be editing the book with them for years. Um, after the book comes out in hardcover, a year later it will publish in paperback. Sometimes, an author will be working on their second novel and they'll want to share early pages with me. So, ideally, I'm working with these authors book over book for years and years and building relationships with them. And so you're kind of juggling a lot of different projects with on different
Yeah.
timelines at any given moment. And that's part of why I love the job so much. Like I think I really, enjoy not knowing what is going to happen in any given day, not really knowing what's, maybe there will be a disappointment for one novel, but there will be something really exciting that we hear about for another. And it's a real roller coaster for every
Yeah.
book and every author. And I like that there's just that kind of constant, um, yeah, just constant
Yeah,
action
change and
happening.
diversity to everything. Yeah. So I mean, how many you must just read so much. Do you have a system of kind of narrowing down what books really grab your heart? Because, like you're saying, you have to work on these things for years, and you're hopefully developing a relationship with these authors over the run of their career. So, do you have some sort of litmus test of as you're getting all these early documents and deciding if you're going to jump on board? How do you know that you should say yes?
Yeah, we always joke that it's sort of like dating. Like there is this sort of chemistry that happens with a submission. And I we all every editor reads a lot at that submission stage. So that's the point at which we're getting manuscripts from literary agents who have made the direct connections with authors who are representing those authors, and then, sending to editors that they think would like it. So they're kind of matchmakers in a way, but inevitably we can only publish so many books in a year. I usually publish 8 to 10, front list books in a year. And some of those spaces now are taken up by my repeat authors who I've worked with for several books. So I just unfortunately don't have the space to acquire many new voices. And so a lot of what I'm reading on submission, even if it's very good, might not be quite right for me for my list.
Sure.
So yeah, so I'm really looking, and I will say, like, because I edit primarily literary fiction, by which I mean fiction where what we call the voice, kind of like the writing style, like the character, kind of the beating heart and like soul of the
Yes.
book is really important. And so that's kind of my litmus test, I would say. And I can usually tell very quickly within a few chapters if the voice is really sparking for me in that way. Um, and then of course, if I love the voice, I'm pulled in, but then, do the characters feel really alive and surprising to me? Does the story feel really fresh? Is the setting really immersive and visceral? Like there are a number of things that I'm looking for, but I would say most of all, I'm just looking for that surprise. Like I'm looking,
Mm,
even if the pitch really appealed to me, like I want the book to kind of exceed even what I was anticipating that it would be,
sure.
something that feels new, and maybe there aren't really like any news stories, but there are so many different ways of telling them and different ways of conveying experience and emotion, and so I'm just looking to, I would say most of all, to kind of be surprised.
Yeah. And so then you were on the panel that sort of reviewed all of the books for the Young Lions Awards last year. Is that correct? Is this something you've done previously, or is this something you only did last year?
Yeah, so I've been on the committee for a few years now. I'm
Okay.
doing it again this year. It's funny, like
Because
once
you're
you
not
get
reading
in, it's
enough.
really hard to leave just because it's so fun. Like even for me who like reads so much for work, I still like I think the day that I stop enjoying reading for pleasure will be the day that I like hang up my editor hat. Like I think
Totally,
at that point I'll
totally.
be like, okay, I'm done with this. Like but I just still get such a thrill like discovering a new author, a new novel, and especially reading for the Young Lions Prize. Like it has such a particular mandate. It's really looking for people who show incredible promise, who are at an earlier stage of their career. Like maybe they've published a few books before, but they haven't quite made it to that breakout level. Like maybe they
Yeah.
haven't won a major prize yet, they haven't been a bestseller, but they have that potential. And so the idea is that the Young Lions Prize will really lift them and help them, advance to fulfill the promise that we see in them. And so, I think I can read, like I'm really looking for people that are pushing the envelope, that are doing things that feel perhaps a little bit risky, that aren't, taking the safe choice. And sometimes the books aren't perfect, but they're just incredibly exciting and fresh and daring. And I think The Land of Milk and Honey absolutely falls into that category. We were all just so, and we'll get into this, of course, but yeah, like just a book like that feels so visceral and so surprising and so different from what else we'd been reading. Like that's just a really a really amazing feeling as a reader. And
Yeah.
then to get to kind of get together with the rest of the committee, because there's usually, I want to say like 15 of us or so that are on the committee, and
Oh,
we're
okay.
all reading the books. Like every book gets read by several people. We don't get to read the full list, but we get to read, a really large cross section of it, and then we get together and everybody gets to sort of advocate for their favorite book, and we have a really fun discussion, and we're all book nerds, so that's like our, it's a really delightful few hours for all of us to just dig into the list, and really hash out. Like often there's more worthy books than we have spaces
I'm
for. So
sure that's got to be so hard. It's got to be so hard to leave
Mhm.
some of the favorites behind. It's got to also be, I feel like, very dramatic behind the scenes in terms of advocating for everybody's favorites because it's so personal, right? Like good writing is good writing, but at the same time, sort of what you were saying about like that feeling like when you're reading things, it's a little bit of a first date feeling of, am I drawn to this or not? Everybody has a different feeling of romance with different books. So I can only imagine that some of those conversations can get very heated.
Yes, definitely. And I would say also, sometimes there's a book that everybody has a consensus of that was very good, that's very worthy of consideration. And then there are a couple of books that maybe don't quite have that same amount of majority consensus, but the people that loved it so much. And often those are the books that make it onto the list
Oh, that's
because
interesting.
it just inspires like such a passionate response in someone that means a lot, whereas,
Yeah.
and I think that way about publishing as well. Like sometimes it's the books that maybe are a little bit more polarizing or a little bit more controversial, but those are the books that you want to talk about. Those are the books that you want to like press into your friends' hands
Yeah.
because you're dying to know what they thought of it. And the books that really stay with you, I think, are the ones that maybe you don't have like um an easy first reaction to. And so I think those books are always especially worthy of like a bigger discussion to sort of figure out like why they sparked such a
Yeah,
reaction
I mean,
in the
I
people that
totally
are
get
really
that
going for them.
having read the five finalists for so many years now. That makes a lot of sense. It's like, and I think part of the reason that I have such a strong response to them as well is because even though I may not personally relate to them or it might not be exactly what I would think I was looking for in a book, you can feel that specificity and you can feel that like fire in the storytelling that is really attractive as a reader, especially as someone who reads a lot, because otherwise everything starts to kind of feel the same. And so that makes a lot of sense hearing you say that. That's really cool. Well, getting a little bit more into the land of milk and honey, what would your elevator pitch of this book be to someone? If someone was like, "Oh, I'm looking for sort of speculative fiction. I love food." And you're like, "Oh my gosh, I have the book for you." Like what would your quick pitch be for this book?
Yeah, so this is a novel by a writer who published her debut novel a few years ago to like incredible critical success. I think it was a finalist for the Booker Prize and was a national bestseller. I read and loved that book. This book is very different, but I think it's just as kind of like accomplished and surprising and remarkable for what it is. So it's set in a near future where climate catastrophe has accelerated and the world has really kind of reached this nadir where only like very basic crops like they eat a lot of like mung bean flour and like really just like very kind of poor crops and most of like what makes food delicious is no longer available. And there's also widespread poverty. Like the world is in a bad place. And this young woman is a chef, but her work has sort of dried up, and she gets an offer to go to this mysterious location and essentially be a private chef. And so she's not really sure what to think of this offer, but she agrees to go. And she ends up in this like mountain enclave in Italy, and working for this very mercurial man who clearly has an incredible amount of wealth and power because she's in this building with a storeroom that is just like filled with delicacies that she never dreamed she would see again. Like the first thing that she sees are these like perfect strawberries. She also has like the most, expensive heritage hens to cook with and all of this really expensive wine. And it's just like the definition of decadence and wastefulness because she's preparing all of these huge feasts for the wealthy members of this enclave. Um, and they are working on a mysterious mission related to what's happening to the world and to kind of battling this extinction crisis. So they seem to maybe be doing something good for the world, but it's a little bit unclear. And she gets really seduced into this world and specifically the daughter of the man that she's working for. And it's all about appetites of various kinds, lusts of various kinds. And she ultimately has to decide if like the pull to this world is strong enough to keep her there, or if she wants a different kind of life, like if she can remember um, what really like used to bring her joy, and ultimately the answer is like the world is calling to her, and she doesn't want to
Yeah.
stay in this, this incredibly, sorry, I just gave a spoiler.
Oh, no, no, it's okay. I mean, the thing is like we want to be there for both the people who are going to read it and the people who have read it. So it's okay. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think and this is a slight spoiler, but I won't say it in the detail with which that would make it not worth it to read the book, but there is a tremendous amount of hope at the end of this book. So, it's kind of loaded, front loaded with a lot of mystery, a lot of discomfort and a lot of loneliness. Like I think what really struck me is how lonely this main character is. And we can't say the main character's name because she is never named, which I think is an interesting choice. But she really struggles to find a sense of self through the whole book. And ultimately, I think through kind of as the challenges that she faces and as the sort of decadence, in a weird way, she's facing decadence in a way, as she kind of like sorts through all that, she starts to kind of come to terms with herself. And then the end is weirdly hopeful. And I found that to be very interesting because I don't think that a lot of I don't know that a lot of speculative fiction is as hopeful as this is at the end. And I think that like it's kind of refreshing to read something that has that much hope built in, that you can kind of go through these really hard moments and darker moments of searching and then really get to a lighter side at the end of all of it. Is that something that struck you as you're reading it? You must read a ton of speculative fiction because I feel like it is just like the rage right now.
Yes, and I love speculative fiction, and I love books that are looking at the climate crisis and our relationship to the natural world, what we're doing to the earth. And I think it's been really fascinating to kind of chart how those books have evolved over just like the past 5 years or
Yeah.
so, and like what authors are drawn to, what they're exploring. And I think more and more, like you used to think of that genre as being very, almost dystopian, like very interested in world building about catastrophe and showing like the mechanics of what happened to lead to the disaster that we're in. And I
Mm,
think more so now, like authors are saying like I can maybe it's like I can kind of count on my authors to like take those steps themselves. I don't have to do as much world building because like the
sure.
world that we're in already has some of these more dystopian strains,
Sure.
and so I think they're becoming much more interested in questions of like, okay, so we're in this world that we didn't anticipate. We've dealt with, these disasters we never could have foreseen. Like, how do we continue to live? Like, how do we continue to love? How do we continue to build family? How do we continue to find hope and find reasons to live? And so I think this novel is in that tradition, which to me is like the most exciting strain of this sort of speculative fiction of like really looking like deep into the dark heart of our situation and finding that light. I think that's like really what readers, at least speaking for myself,
Yeah.
need right now. Like I think if it's too kind of unrelenting, maybe that was more exciting in the past when it didn't feel like we were already sort of living that. But I think
Yeah.
now it's much more interesting to say like, yes, we acknowledge all of this and you know, we're still all here. Like, how do we kind of move forward?
Yeah. And what was your reaction to um the author not naming the protagonist? Like I was okay with it. I feel like in a weird way when I read I can sort of picture everybody, but they're faceless in a way. So it like kind of
Mhm.
is how I read anyway. Um, I find it's harder to talk about a book when you can't name the character, though. So, like, I'm just curious what your thoughts as an editor would be about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this context, it sort of fits in with her overall style because she is writing. I don't want to say that it's like a parable or a fairy tale because it feels very specific in a lot of ways, but I do
Hmm.
think there's like this almost like universal quality of like we know that they're in Italy, but we have no idea where. Like the
Where?
town that they're in it's just known as the land of milk and honey,
Yeah,
which again conjures this sort of like parable, like biblical world, and we don't know what the time frame is. Like there's so many specific details that we aren't given. And so
yeah,
I feel like she has become like there was this passage that I really loved in the book talking about like the difference between the main character and Aida, who is the daughter of the businessman that she's working for, who is this like real like larger than life tour de force character, and their relationship is like really central to the story. And she talks about how Aida still like has so much rage for what's happening to the world and so much like passion, and that the narrator and so much of their generation like that has sort of been like you know, drained out of them. Like they don't have the
yeah.
luxury of that rage and that anger. And maybe like also they don't have the privilege of a personality in the same way. And
Mm,
even like an identity, a named identity. And I felt like the narrator came into focus so much more as the novel progressed. And like you see her even just like gaining weight, like like taking up more space in the world. And by the end, like I do think she feels like such a more even though like from the beginning we're very drawn to her and like very
yeah,
drawn to her way of describing the world and like specifically just like her sensual experience of it, I did feel this is like a long-winded way of saying that I felt like in this case the choice to not name her felt part of this larger
yeah.
project as a whole as opposed to like sometimes it can feel maybe like a little bit precious or
Sure.
like a more sort of mannered choice. But I felt like in this case it sort of fit in with that whole like way she has of describing the world in general.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, it's interesting because um again, it makes it harder to discuss with someone. It's like people ask me all the time, like, "Oh, what should I read?" And I'm like, "Well, this is a great book where, well, this person who doesn't have a name, who did, like,
Right,
um,
you almost want to like give her a name just
yeah,
for the
yeah,
purpose
totally,
of talking about
exactly,
her.
just for the sake of discussing it. But I do see what you're saying, and it's interesting because I didn't think about it in a fairy tale element. But you're right. It does. Everything is sort of a little bit ethereal. Like and she's also dealing with the grief of losing her mother. So it's like she's had a
Mm,
lot of loss really quickly. She's lost her sense of the world because of the smog that's kind of taken over and killed all the crops. And she's lost a sense of her identity as an American because she was in London when the borders closed in this particular story, so she can't get back home. Then she loses her mom and can't really go to do anything about that. So there's a lot of loss, and it's almost like she's kind of hiding in her experience of like remembering food a little bit off the top, and
mhm,
so fascinating that she does go, cooks all this incredible food for people and can't eat it at all for herself. I mean, she ends up very unwell because she just can't get herself to eat. And then, it's only through like Aida like coming in and like having a relationship with her and that kind of human contact of another person where she starts to be able to take up some more space in the world, to use your words. And um, I don't know, I think there's something, I think you're right. I think that there is something that's much bigger at play there that I may not have thought of it that way as I was reading it, but that does really make sense.
Yeah, and I thought like her inability to eat at the beginning was so like as a reader you're just like you just like ache for her so much because she's like
Yeah.
preparing all and it but it is also like this weird thing where like you as the reader like she's describing it the food in a way that's like even food that I maybe wouldn't want to eat that's like
Yeah.
really, quote unquote like fancy like haute cuisine, like real, like crazy, like they eat like snapping turtle blood in one scene, like just the craziest dishes. But like
Yeah.
she describes them in a way where you're just like your mouth is like watering as you're reading, but like we can't eat either. So like we're being like
Oh,
deprived of it, she's
fascinating.
being deprived of it. And then
Yes.
like when she finally gets to start eating again, like it's just like this relief. But yeah, like I felt like we were really there with her in those early scenes and it was just like her descriptions of the food felt like extra decadent and like extra over the top because she couldn't eat it herself. So she was
Yes.
trying to like bring it to life through her words. And like, yeah, that was, I mean, I don't think I've ever read anybody write about food the way that she does. Like it was just,
Totally.
and I love books about food. Like I feel like I've read a lot of them, but this one is just so like yeah, just so like I just kept thinking of the word like visceral. It's
Yeah.
just so
Are you a
visceral.
foodie in real life? Are you someone who like really loves food?
Yes, definitely, definitely. And like I would say I'm a very adventurous eater, but like there were just some things where I feel like she wanted you to be disgusted in a
Yeah, no, it
bowl.
was it was beyond adventurous. It was interesting to me because like I'm not a huge foodie. Like I mean, of course I like love good food, but I'm
Hmm.
sort of one of those people who like eats to live, not lives to eat, you know, and I can
Hmm.
appreciate people who do feel that way, but I don't have like I'm just much more practical about food, I think. And so
Hmm.
I was actually surprised that I was so taken by the descriptions of food because it's not typically my default setting, you know? So it was like she was able to accomplish something with that that was like crossing over even for someone who like isn't thinking about food in that way typically, you know? It was really
Yeah,
fascinating.
that's so
Um,
interesting.
I felt like also, you know, there were some interesting themes of like obviously the wealthy versus the sort of the haves versus the have-nots, you know, especially in some sort of crisis like this, and some of the possible like logistical politics that surrounded this kind of an experiment to try to like figure out how you could regrow things on the land after this crisis. And I'm just curious for you, like where that falls in terms of your what the other things that you're reading right now. You know, I mean, obviously, I feel like this is a big subject in the world right now, and without it being in a political way or anything, I just was curious how that landed for you. I think that she had a tricky uphill battle with it because she was inside this elite experience while also trying to touch on the full experience. You know, I think she did an incredible job of it, but I feel like you've probably read more things that are in that space, and I was just kind of curious what your experience of that part of the novel was.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was it was so interesting and she really brought a lot of nuance into it. Like it's not this obvious dichotomy of like the people that she's working for are pure evil and everybody else outside are like the victims. Like
Yeah,
she really gets into a like for instance, as I was saying before, like they are doing things that could help, bring the world back to life. Like they're figuring out various like genetic modifications of of livestock that are extinct to try to bring
yeah,
them back, like trying to genetically engineer crops, which I know is a complicated subject, but
yeah,
in order to feed the world and like there were real world ramifications of that work and like they had kept the world alive in some ways, but they also were withholding all of this decadence and plenty from people who were starving like just outside of their gates. And so
yeah.
it's kind of like how do you just like does, you know, is it justified? Like, do the ends justify the means? And the government, in Italy, like in Italy, just around them, that they're sort of like working against, but also trying to work with. Um, also like they have a lot of like are their interests all pure and good?
That's
So I,
fair.
I really liked that she brought a lot of like depth and complexity into it. I think that's really important right now because like so much of like so much of news and politics right now feels like very dichotomized in that way and
Yeah.
very black and white. And like I think fiction is a place to explore some of that complexity that can be lost and give us a forum for discussing it in a way that feels personal because like we get to know these characters in this story, like there's an intimacy to it. And
Yeah.
so I really, yeah, like I'm definitely looking for more, like that's something I would say that I'm very drawn to right now in my reading, like people
Mm.
that are facing these questions head on and not just kind of delivering easy answers.
Yeah, it also feels like, so many of the things that I've read in the last few years that deal with climate or politics, and it's like everyone kind of is ready to tear everything down, but without an idea of how to rebuild or like what would be better in its place. And it's
Hmm.
like there's I'm a little bit like exhausted by like disruption for disruption's sake without a plan on the other side. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
and I felt like because of the way that this novel ends and because of sort of this event that happens, it kind of forces the people who have the means or the money and the resources to start making a difference. It kind of it like wakes them up. Like this disaster sort of wakes them up into a more, maybe democratic's the wrong word, but it's like a more even playing field after that crisis at the end, like without giving too much away. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like it sort of forces them to go, wait a second, we can't rush. And if we run ahead and try to be selfish, then we're going to be destroyed along with everybody else. So how do we, it almost comes from a selfish place, but it also forces this more even playing field. And I feel like, the author starts really kind of talking about what that rebuild would look like. And I was like, oh, this is so refreshing because I feel like so many people are like, tear it all down without any plan in place, like, did that feel
Hmm.
true for you as you were going through those sections of the book?
Yes, absolutely. That was really, really well said. Like I was absolutely feeling that too. And it reminds me of a conversation that I had recently with an author of mine who's writing, like she's also working in this speculative
Hmm.
um, fiction realm, and so thinking a lot about these questions. And she was saying like she's especially drawn to the moment after the catastrophe because in a way
Mm,
that's like the most dangerous moment of all, because that's the moment where like all these different factions are kind of fighting for supremacy. Like that's when you're trying to decide what the future will be and what the world will look like. And I feel like
yeah,
this novel was also playing in that space. Like it doesn't really tell us, we're not like getting the nuts and bolts of what this crisis was, what it looked like as the world was slow. It would sort of be like
yeah,
a novel set in 2020, like the end of 2021, as opposed to like March of 2020. Like,
yeah,
we can kind of accept the premise that like this catastrophe has happened. And now we're in that stage of like, okay, well, the world order has been totally overturned. Like, what happens next? And I think that is like such an interesting like fertile ground for a novel because again you have like all these different forces with all of their different motivations and ideas, and I think that was a really fascinating part of this story. And just, yeah, just kind of seeing how people decided to like deal with the aftermath.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I had asked if you'd send me a few quotes that you loved. I'm going to read one of them, and then I'm just kind of curious, more from like a, not even really about this novel, but just more from a practical approach of you as an editor. Like, let's say this manuscript lands in your inbox. I was going to say on your desk, and then I realized it was probably an inbox. That you get drawn in, that you feel safe with this writer, that that you feel like there is this fresh voice, and you come across, let's just say this sentence, like, what is your like where just like talk me through, I'm going to read it for our listeners, but like just talk me through like the way your brain breaks down a sentence, like a paragraph, or I guess it's like a couple sentences like this in terms of like, oh, this is special and here's why it's special and here's why it's unique. Do you know what I mean? Like if because
Yeah.
there are so many special sentences in this novel. So for you to pull four of them out and highlight them, I'm just looking for your editor's brain as to like what it is that to you makes this special. Okay,
Yeah.
so for everyone listening, here is the quote. There is time on this greener earth for girls to ripen into themselves. What they'll do with that is beyond anyone's knowing. Seeing as they are not limited to anger versus dinner, seriousness versus sentiment, survival versus all life's rampancy, they can choose. She was cruel and not, and cutting and kind, and she gave, though not always to humanity, in her own unpredictable ways. I imagine her howling with laughter at the strangeness of how she touched this world.
Oh, I'm like getting goosebumps again as you were reading it out loud. Yeah, so this quote is from near the end of the book, and it's about Aida, the daughter. Um, and I think I just love that central relationship so much. And I think that even though like there are so many incredible descriptions of food, which, I also pulled some of those
Yes.
out, but
Hmm.
I was just like highlighting, like you could basically highlight any line about food and it would feel really remarkable. But I think that sentence for me just really, it's just so like loving,
Mm.
and so complicated. And I think that's so much of like how these two characters feel about each other. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm also just in a like having loved the Wicked movie, having been a huge Wicked fan, like just this
Yes.
like polar opposite friends, like having so much love and respect for each other, even though they're so different and they might not, respect each other's life choices. I feel
Mm.
like that's very much the vibe of this relationship too. And I thought it was so generous. And I think it's just like a beautiful, like it's just beautiful word by word. Like it's very, it's just gorgeous, like the way that she kind of unexpectedly puts words together. And yeah, I found it really beautiful. Like I'm gonna just look at the quote again so I can
Sure,
like
yeah,
remember
of course.
the specific words, but like um I don't know, this idea of like I imagine her howling with laughter at the strangeness of how she touched this world. I feel like that really captures this question of, like intentionality and like these are young women and like of course they have a lot of agency over their decisions, but they're also like I think Aida has this like dual identity of like being instrumental in her father's work and having incredible, brilliant ideas of her own of how to save the world. Like she's kind of a genius. Like she's a
Yeah.
scientific genius and she carries that very seriously. But she's also this like kind of a wild, sensual, like loving person. So like you kind of see that dichotomy in her. And I think this quote just captures that and like punctures this idea of her as like being too self-serious. And so I think like when I encounter a few sentences like that, like again, it just sort of like distilled for me why I was so captivated by this character and this relationship.
Yeah. And so again, this is coming from my own ignorance, and I'm hoping that this is something that the audience relates to, in terms of just being interested. But I feel like there are so many careers within the literary world that we just don't, we kind of know about, but don't totally know about. And we certainly don't know what the path to that career looks like. So can you just talk me through your journey of like, clearly being an avid reader and a lover of literary things from probably a young age, but like how does that then, like where do you go to school? What do you study? Like how do you end up in your position that you're in right now? Like what's the journey? And I'm sure everybody's journey is different, but it's just the kind of career that doesn't get laid out for you. Like you don't go to, your high school counselor and they say like, here's how you become a great, book editor someday. It's like it's just not something that gets talked about. So I'm just very curious what the specificity of that is.
Yes, definitely. Because it's not like you go to like med school
No.
law school to become an
Yeah.
editor. Like I think really your education is like a lifetime of reading. And I will say like my path, I would say my path is like pretty straightforward and traditional. But there are so many different paths. But just to give you a sense of mine, like I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. So I did not grow up in like the nexus of publishing, which is very much in New York. I didn't know any people that were involved in publishing. I didn't really know what an editor, like exactly as you were saying, like of course
Sure.
I knew
Yeah.
there must be somebody that was like putting these books out into the world, but like I never really had a term for like what that person was or what their job might look like. And when I was in college, I studied English because like books are all I've ever loved. Like I always knew I wanted to do something with books, but my dad is a professor. He's a chemistry professor, so like very different
Yeah.
field of study, but like I think I always really romanticized academia because like he loved his job so much, loved teaching so much. I have a lot of teachers in my family. So I think I sort of went to college thinking like I'll become an academic. Great. Like I'll just study English for the rest of my life. And then I think when I was like a junior, um, the Office of Career Services like invited a publisher to come. It was Michael Peach, who was the head of Little Brown at the time, came and just gave like a little talk about what it was like to be an editor and be a publisher. And it really just like that was the first time that I'd met anybody in publishing.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. That sounds amazing.
That's
Like I didn't know
fascinating.
that
So
that
you
was a
knew as
job.
soon as he was describing it that you were drawn to
Yeah.
that.
Definitely. Yeah. I wish that I had like a clearer memory of the things that he said. I think I just, yeah, like just the way that he spoke about books and the life of an editor was like really just delightful to me. And so I ended up that summer doing an internship in New York in publishing at Frost and Giroux, which is part of Macmillan, which is the company that I'm at now.
Oh, wow.
And this was unfortunately still in the days of unpaid internships. Now, pretty much all internships are paid. It's much better, but this was still in those days. And but it was really fun, and I would say like even though like as an intern, you're not necessarily getting a very strong sense of like the day-to-day life of an editor. Like I was surrounded by all these amazing people, all these incredible books. And that kind of gave me a further taste for it. And when I graduated, I decided that I didn't want to give up my academic dream like too hastily. So I was like, I'll do a 1 year master's program. That will be like my little test case. And if I love it, then maybe I'll continue on to the PhD. So I did a 1 year master's program in England, studying Jane Austen. Like it was really
Oh,
fun. It was very
wow.
much like living my 18th century romantic dream. Um, but it was also like extremely lonely. Like I was in this very
Mm.
social um environment. Like I had a great cohort. We were all really good friends. We would go out together every night, like hang out on the weekends, travel, like but from 9 till 5, I was alone in the library, like working on my reading
Wow.
list and writing. And I just realized that did not have the constitution for that. Like it sounded like a dream before I was actually doing it, but I realized I wanted something that was more dynamic, that was more structured, I just realized like as much as I love Jane Austen, I couldn't imagine like spending the rest of my life kind of working on the same project for like such extended periods of time.
Yeah.
So at that point, I decided that publishing was sort of the best of both worlds and that I would still get to read and write all day and I would still be immersed in a world of books and book people, but I would also have a little bit more control of where I would be and I would have so much more just kind of social interaction and as I was saying earlier, like just so many different projects going at any given time. Like I think that
Yeah.
was just really exciting for my brain to like know that there would just be um, constantly new people to meet, new projects to fall in love with. So I moved to New York and I ended up getting a position as an editorial assistant at Knopf, which is an imprint at Random House. and I was there for 3 years, and that really felt like my true kind of indoctrination into publishing. And we would joke it was almost like a little bit like being in grad school, but not like a very different, not the
Yeah.
bad
So
parts, but
when you're
like
someone's assistant in that position, are you starting to read manuscripts that come in? Are you weighing in on them, or are you just sort of on the sideline reading if you want to? Like, what does that look like?
yes. So you are really like you're trying to sort of like be an extra brain for your boss. So I would read submissions, I would write readers reports. So basically, like if my boss had something in that she thought would be, that was a potential acquisition for us and she wanted a closer read on it, she would ask me to read it with her.
Oh,
I would
cool.
read it as quickly as I could and then write her like a page-long report saying a little bit of plot summary, like what I liked, what I didn't like, if I thought that she should consider it seriously. So, of course, like for a lot of those projects, she was reading them simultaneously, but you are a bit of a gatekeeper in terms of, if I was really passionate about something, she might consider it more seriously if I really had like real
Oh,
reservations
that's
about
interesting. I mean,
something.
so I mean, that's a big decision then that when someone's making a choice about who their assistant is going to be, because that's a big deal. I mean, that could be the difference between someone getting published or not, is that the assistant took notice.
Yeah, so you want an assistant that really, I think, shares your taste and understands your taste and can like inhabit you as they're making these
So, but how do you
decisions on
decide
your.
that? Like right now, I'm assuming you have assistant or assistants. So when you are in that process of selection, how are you able to assess if someone lands within your taste?
It's hard. It's really hard. Like I think I was very lucky as an assistant. I just happened to like be assisting someone who was basically like who I wanted to be when I grew up. Like we
Right.
really had that mind meld, and that's quite rare, I would say. Like I have an amazing assistant right now. I would say like we do have a lot of taste overlap, and sometimes I actually appreciate that she doesn't have exactly the same taste as me
Mm.
because like she can sort of push me on certain things, like because I do have some biases towards certain types of fiction, like
Uh-huh.
that are going to sort of be like kryptonite for me. And sometimes like I will absolutely acquire them and it'll be great. And sometimes she'll be like, maybe we should just put a little bit more thought into that one. Like that might be
Like
just
maybe
a
that
you
was
book.
just for you and not for everyone.
Yes, exactly. And I think you can also kind of train yourself to like read for somebody else by being really familiar with the books that they've acquired and
Oh, that
edited
makes
and
sense.
talking like we talk a lot about why I have made a certain submission, like choice about a submission. So like a lot of it is through that conversation. And I think one issue with like having the exact same taste with your boss, which is something that I had to deal with as an assistant, is that like when you like I was there for 3 years, and at that point, like that's when you sort of start to think about becoming more than just the assistant. Like that's when you
Right.
want to start building your own list. That's when you want to start being an editor in your own right. And when you're somewhere where you're just surrounded by people with the exact same taste as you, it can be really hard to kind of see a path
Oh, to
forward.
carve out your own space in that company. That makes sense.
Yeah. So actually, sometimes it's great when an assistant comes in with their own very specific niche taste that's not like anybody else, but they
Mm.
can still, have that general taste and read widely and broadly. And so for me, like after those 3 years, and I was also at a place where um, there were basically just assistants and editors. Like there wasn't a position of like assistant editor and associate editor. So you
Mm.
just sort of have to like be an assistant for many years before getting,
Yeah.
and it has changed since then, but and I was just at a point where I was like, I need a little bit more or I'm gonna burn out. And
Yeah.
I heard about this position at Flatiron, and at that point, Flatiron was a brand new imprint. Like the fiction publisher had just come over to start the program. I was her first hire. So I
Wow.
was going to a place where there was only runway ahead of me, like there were only empty shelves to fill. And that was really exciting as a young
Wow.
editor, like with a lot to prove and like a lot of hunger. So it just ended up being the perfect next place for me. And I've been here ever since. And for me, like it's been really just personally rewarding and gratifying to get to like work with an author for a long period of time to like really develop. And I work with a lot of debut authors. I love publishing debut fiction. That's something that's like very important to me as an editor. And so much of that is building trust with your authors
Mm,
because, you know, it's like an incredibly vulnerable thing to publish a book.
yes. Yeah.
And when you've never done it before, you need to trust the person that's like tasked with putting your book into the world. And so
Yeah.
when you're doing so much of that trust building, it's really special when like you can then work with them on their second book and their third book and like really invest in their career in the long term. That's
Yeah.
always my dream with writers that I bring to Flatiron. So yeah, so all I had to say,
That's
like if
incredible though, but it's so helpful to hear. It's like I mean, I feel like I've gotten this amazing peek behind the curtain by doing this interview series and just by hearing from the authors what their experiences and their relationships have been like with their editors. But I still had no idea kind of how you get there. You know what I mean? Like it feels like such a specific and important skill set. It's so specific to be able to take these huge documents and go, you know what, maybe this could go away and this could stay. And like, this is really beautiful, but maybe the story really is this. It's like, these are huge book defining suggestions that you guys make. And it's such a specific skill set to be able to look at something that's maybe, I don't know, 200 pages too long and be like, this is 200 pages too long. And these are the 200 pages that can go. You know what I mean? Like, it's really,
yeah,
I don't know. To me, it's like a very magical skill set that is incredible to hear the journey to getting there. Um, one of the last things I really wanted to ask is just what advice do you have for those up and coming voices or those people who are submitting manuscripts? Obviously it sounds like they need to already have a book agent to even make it to your desk. But, even once they have that agent, and they're thinking about sending a manuscript, I'm sure there's all different states of manuscript that come to you. And what would your advice be to a young writer that is wanting to put a manuscript on your desk in terms of getting your attention and getting your attention in a way where, yes, we know there's the romance that you were talking about, but there's also got to be some practicality to, you know, the sort of I don't know, like the logistics of the document, and like the state of the document and the way that it's positioned by the book agent and all those things.
yes. Well, I would say, and first of all, like there is like as you were sort of describing, like the massive, the massive notes that like editors give their authors. Like there is something like so kind of like hubristic about that idea that we could like have these brilliant suggestions to give to authors. But I think like when the way that I think about it is that and I think this was something that I learned like the longer that I was an editor of like, you want to help, like you are not imposing your vision onto a book. You're
Mm,
helping and like you're seeing what the author is trying to do, and you're putting all of your like fresh eyes and all of your like editorial power into helping them achieve that vision. And I think that really unlocked something for me when I realized that.
mm,
And I think that is something that's super important for authors to bear in mind as well. Like everybody's going to have their own subjective take to your work, but I think you need to have a clear vision of what your book is and what you want your book to be, and not like be open to notes from your agent, from your editor. Like maybe like I've suggested, really massive changes, like changing the ending, changing the beginning, like taking a character away, like huge plot points, like, and you have to be open to that, but not just for the sake of like saying yes. You have to
right. You
really
have to
feel
be able
like,
to own it as if you can see that they're actually guiding you to a thing you wanted
yeah,
to
that
do
they
and you didn't
like
know it.
exactly that they saw that they see the book as you see it. And they had this idea that you just couldn't really see because you were so in the weeds of it. And so
Yeah.
one piece of advice that I always give to writers who are, kind of at that early querying stage, or who are like when they're going after trying to find a literary agent, and then again when they have submitted their novel and are talking to editors, is to just like feel like the moment. I think it's hard for writers sometimes to decide like when they should start querying and when it's
Mm,
time to like, stop fiddling with their manuscript and
yeah.
bring someone else onto the team. And I think one really important thing to be sure of is that you are like very grounded in your vision of the book, and
Mm,
that you know what it is in your heart. Like, I know
Yeah.
that sounds like very, I don't know,
No, but
unquantifiable, but like I think,
no, I understand what you're saying though. I think that, and I think anyone who is a writer would understand what you're saying because, it's very easy to have an idea that could go a million directions, but
hmm
you kind of have to know why you're right. It's like, why are you writing this? Like, why have you written this? What are you trying to accomplish by putting this in the world? And I think if
yeah.
you don't have that North Star, you can kind of be tipped in too many directions and then like you no longer have a thing, right? I mean, I know that from like screenwriting and from scripts and I certainly haven't ever attempted to write a novel, but I have found that like as soon as I can sum something up into one sentence of like this is why I'm writing this, then it like the whole thing starts to kind of like settle into place. And
hmm
but I don't have that answer when I start all the time, but it's like you have to keep going, I think, until you have that answer for yourself, because otherwise you don't have anything to hang on to when you are getting those notes. And then you'll know the truth. Like, if your note is like, you got to take this character away, like you'll know in your gut, right? Of like, ah, she's right. I think I've been wanting to get rid of that person anyway. You know what I mean? Like, or I see your point. However, here's why this person is so important to me, and the whole thing doesn't work unless they're there, and like
Yeah.
you
And
can start
sometimes that
refining from there.
process of pushing back against a criticism actually like unlocks it anyway. Like sometimes
Yes.
I'm really
Just
delighted
starts the
when like one of my
conversation.
authors, yeah, like when they're like, no, actually, I can't make that change, and here's why, because they then understand that like it wasn't their intention, but I had this particular reaction to that choice that they'd made. And so like clearly it's not working, but the answer might not be the one that the solution might not be the one that I proposed,
Yes.
but they can come up with a better solution.
Yeah.
And I think, like publishing is it's so hard to break in as an editor, as an agent, as an author. And so I think sometimes when people are querying agents in particular, like they are just so relieved when somebody reaches out. And I
Mm,
completely understand that, like just this feeling of like I've been shouting into the void and finally like a voice has come back to me. And so I think it can be easy to just say yes to the first person,
mm,
but it's really important to remember that like your agent is hopefully going to be your advocate for years and years, like decades and decades, not just for this book, but for your whole career. And so you need to have somebody that really understands your vision and really understands, like, not just for this book, but for your whole career and is going to help you get there. And if you say yes to somebody where you might have like that niggling feeling of like, okay, like this person's really impressive, or like, I really love some of the books that they've worked on, but like, I don't know if I totally believe that they see what my book is. Like, you should trust that voice in your head because, if they don't understand your book, they're probably not going to be able to sell it. Then you're going to be
yeah.
back at square one, or they'll sell it to the wrong person. And then you'll just, like it's so
Yeah.
important to get that first foundational relationship right. And, so I think I always urge authors to have like real questions ready when they're talking to a prospective agent. Like, don't just don't just respond to the questions that they're asking you. Like, make sure that you're asking questions of yourself, like for yourself, like
Yeah.
questions like, what genre do you see this, like very basic ones, like
Yeah.
where do you see this like sitting on a bookshelf? Like, what are the comp authors you're thinking of? Comps are like what we refer
Mm,
to as books that are for a similar audience, similar readership.
yeah.
Do they have a sense of like the kinds of like would they send it to big houses or smaller independent houses? Like, just making sure that you come prepared yourself and that you feel confident and comfortable to ask those questions and to push, and not just like be sort of passive in that moment. And I know that
Yeah.
can be extremely scary because you might not like the answers that you get, and you might feel like, oh no, like does this mean I have to start over again? But it's really worth it because, you know, agents don't sell every book that they take on,
Mm,
unfortunately. Like And I think you want somebody that even if they can't sell that first book, like they're going to stay invested. They're going to sell your second book and they're going
Yeah,
to keep pushing for you and you feel comfortable with them. And some people want their agent to be a very like intimate friend, like a therapist almost, like somebody that you can call every day and feel really comfortable talking to. Some people want their agent to be like their business person that like does their deals on their behalf, handles all their contracts, but they don't need them to be that close personal
sure.
confidant. And maybe you
Yeah.
don't entirely know yet like who you want your agent to be, but try to like ask questions early on where you can figure out what the tenor of your relationship will be and if that's something that's comfortable for you. And same with editors, like when I have a submission in that I love, I will always have a phone. And this is very like standard across the industry. The agent will set up phone calls with prospective editors before the auction, before anybody makes any bids, so that I have a chance to tell the author, first of all, like why I loved their book, why I was drawn to it, what makes it so special for me, like, all the things that I loved about it, which hopefully will resonate with them. But
Yeah.
then also, like, if I have any big editorial suggestions, like, I want to be very candid about that up front so that the author isn't in a situation where they're like, okay, I thought this editor loved my book. Like, they won this
Yeah.
auction. Like, they had this amazing phone call with me, but now they want me to do like
Yes.
5 pages worth of edits, like from their editorial letter. Like, this came out of left field. So, even though there like might be and almost always are like surprises along the way, like things that I didn't catch on my first read that I want to
Sure.
push them on later, like I definitely want to at least give them a sense of like, I see this as a book that still needs a lot of work, but I really believe in it, or
Right.
like this is nearly perfect. We're just going to do a line edit.
Mm.
And I've had some cases like usually if I'm drawn to a book, it's because I see what the author is trying to do. I, have that like mind meld vision. And so like the editorial part of the call is like the most fun and like we're brainstorming together and like, having that great connection. But in some, in a handful of cases, it's been very clear that like the author is not interested in doing the work that I would want them to do. And I'm so happy when they're honest with me and like when I can know that up front and bow out of the auction. Like that is,
Mm.
I think it's really important that authors be, you know, be really candid on those calls and
Yeah.
also like do some, some soul searching before the auction to make sure that they're not gonna go with an editor that's gonna make them change their book in ways that they don't want to.
Think that's all amazing advice. And I've just never been able to talk to someone who gives such practical advice to people who are writing. So I'm just super grateful for your time. I'm super grateful that you've so carefully articulated all of these things. And, obviously we talked a lot about The Land of Milk and Honey by C Pam Zhang, but, I think it was really, for me, super fascinating just to hear your journey and everything you've, done to get here. And now I just want to read all of your authors. So
Well, thank you.
I'm gonna start digging through and start going back and reading stuff that I may not have read yet. So, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time, and hopefully we'll get to circle back and talk with you about another book someday.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thanks for everybody listening. This was really fun.